So first of all, thank you for inviting me here. I was going to get you to all kind of stand up, but you've done that already. Ideally, I would get you to stand up and go outside and get some fresh air, but I know you'd never come back, so that's no good. So what I've been asked to share today is something of how learning through landscapes has developed and what we do. We've been working in school grounds for over 30 years, and hopefully some of what we've done and how we work will be useful for other people here. Some of you will find that this works for you. Some of you will find bits that work for you. Some of you will look at it and go, no, that's not going to work for us. That's fine. This is just how we do things and what we have found works for us, and I hope it will be useful for some of you as well. So, see how I do the clicker? Yes. So what I'm going to do is kind of give you a little bit of context about learning through landscapes, about schools in the UK. We have to remember we have 4 completely different education systems. One in England, one in Scotland, one in Wales, and one in Northern Ireland. So I'll speak generally about the UK because we work across the UK, but it's different, slightly different in all the countries. I'm going to talk about how we work, the kind of things we do to support and work with schools and ultimately support children. And then how we engage with the schools. How do we get to the schools? How do we reach those schools? And also how important things like this event are, how we try and share what we're doing with people like yourselves. And then hopefully I'll leave time for questions at the end. So about learning through landscapes, just to give you a bit of background, we started off after a research project. So first of all, Merrick Denton Thompson, who is a landscape architect, he worked for Hampshire County Council, and he had grown up in environments where he had free range to roam. His father was a diplomat and he'd lived in the Falkland Islands in Africa, and in those spaces he'd just had chance to roam free as a child. And then in his working life, he was asked to look at school grounds in the UK and Hampshire and redesign them, and he discovered grey and green deserts. And he felt children shouldn't be spending time all the time they do in those grey and green deserts. So he got together with other similar people, and they started a research project. And part of that research project was going around school grounds throughout the UK, schools finding out what the situation was on the ground. For many of those schools, it was those grey and green deserts. There were some exceptions, and we already know about one at the Coombs Infant School, as it was at the time. And they inspired the charity to be set up. So the research was done in the 80s, late 80s, and LTL was set up in 1990 following that research. So we support schools and all who work with them. Sorry, I think I'm making a bit of noise. We're an educational charity first and foremost. We're about the child first, but we just happen to do everything outdoors. We say we're the UK's school grounds outdoor learning and play charity. So that's where we focus. We focus on school grounds, and when I talk about school grounds, I also mean outdoor spaces in the early years. We work from kind of early years right the way through to the end of school. And it's really important to say that research and evaluation, we started through that way, and we try and make sure that is incorporated in all we do now as well. So I think it's interesting to look at how we are funded, because this defines how we work. For a lot of people here, you're funded by local government or even national government. We have virtually no government funding. So this is from last year. Very little public sector funding. We have a little bit of investment, but the vast majority of our funding comes from applying for grants, for projects and initiatives. So trusts and lotteries. So a lot of our time is working out who might give us funding and how what we do and how what we want to do can be funded by others. But we also have some services that schools pay for. So training and advisory visits, schools also pay for that, and we have some publications. So what are school grounds like in the UK? They're generally the grey and green deserts, that sports pitches and courts. Now, I'm not against those. My background is I was a physical education teacher, so I like those bits of those, but not the whole of the school grounds. We have trees and hedges tend to be around the boundaries rather than in the heart of schools. There are always exceptions to every rule. And the biggest exceptions are the private schools, where many of our politicians went to school, including our Prime Minister. Our Prime Minister went to school in the city that I live in. And the school grounds there are beautiful with rivers running through, water meadows, all sorts. But that doesn't matter for the rest of the state school. A lot of schools do have, over the years, have developed areas. We have growing areas, we have ponds, we sometimes have play equipment. Sorry, this was a test to see if I could do this. And I think, is it making a noise? Yeah, can you help, Johan? Thank you. It's not lower, yeah. It keeps filling up. Is that any better? Any better or worse? Is that okay? Cool. So a lot of schools do have made developments to their grounds. So we are seeing improvements, but it's often in a little corner somewhere, and often miles away, or, you know, they're a little bit. So there are some schools that have made fantastic changes. But something to say about English schools, which is really depressing, is that new schools do not have to have any school grounds at all. Yeah, so it kind of makes us feel a bit, what have we done? But this is because there was a call for trying to get really cheap schools built. We needed more schools, and so a cost-effective way, maybe best way of saying it, was maybe to put them in office blocks and things like that. And so they may just have had the car parking around the outside. One of our trustees works in a school that is in the middle of a roundabout, in the middle of a town. What schools need to be able to have is access. This is just England, Scotland, Wales, Northern Ireland, great. In England, what we need to be able to have is to be able to walk to spaces that can use a local park or whatever. That's fine, but you can't just nip out and do some, collect some data, gather some stuff, see what's out there. It takes so much more organisation to take children off site. So it's really not great, but that's the situation we're in. So we work with all sorts of people to do with schools and school grounds. So we work with schools in early years settings, but we also work with local authorities. Local authorities, the local government who run schools. In England, again, we also have what are called multi-academy trusts who run groups of schools, and can be large groups of schools, 50 or 60 schools. So that's who run schools. We work with national governments, especially in Scotland. It's easier kind of to talk with those local officers. So I keep pointing that direction because two of our Scottish team are over there. Matt Robinson, who's our Scottish director, and Steve Moiser, who has worked in school grounds for forever for LTL. If you want to find out what goes on in Scotland, do talk to them. We also work with school grounds specialists, so people like many of you here who work to support schools. And you may be designers, you may be educationalists, all sorts of people. So we work with those people as well. And I'll talk more about that later. But we also work with a lot of other organisations who do a bit of school grounds. So there may be wildlife organisations who have some education officers who may support schools with their specialism. So they may go in and help schools develop wildlife areas, put in ponds, things like that. So we're working with people with different specialist areas, including play, including horticulture. So we work with others to learn and to be able to reach more schools as well. So what we do, we tell people that outdoor learning and play really matters. That's one of the things we do. We advocate that. We say this is important. And somebody asked me yesterday, I think it was, I can't remember who it was, but anyway, I was asked yesterday, I was Carol, I think, what do I learn from coming to these conferences? I've been doing this for a long time. I've been working in school grounds for about 30 years. Do I learn anything? I always learn something new. Always learn something new. And that is really useful for us, especially the research that's going on. Really useful for us to be able to go back and make sure we're doing things right and to share and spread that message. So we try to inspire people in what they're doing. What has been fantastic about some of the things we've seen already are some of the amazing images we see. And that's hard sometimes to get those amazing images in the UK. So if we can nick any, that would be great. But also to enable teachers and early years practitioners giving them confidence and the skills to teach outside. Because the research suggests time is a matter, health and safety a matter, but actually the most important thing is confidence in teachers. Because in the UK generally, they don't get that training when they're in their initial teacher training. But as you can see at the bottom, this is the most important thing. Children and young people are at the heart of all we do. So we try to make sure whatever we are doing, that is who we think of first. So I'm going to talk about the different things we do and why we do them. And as I say, some of these you will find will work for you. Some of them may not be so right. But this is how we work and this is what we do. So first of all, as I say, we've always done research and evaluation. Some of you may have come across this publication. Do look for it online as a really grotty copy online, but it's really good. It's called Special Places, Special People. And it's all about what we call the hidden curriculum of school grounds. It's all about how children read their environment, how they read the messages coming from their school grounds. And if their school grounds are grey and boring, and they say, oh, well, the adults think that's good enough for us. But it's also other messages. We've been talking about how important it is to do what you say and to reflect that in how the school is, and that means the outside as well as the inside. So that is really important. And we've also, as well as doing evaluation ourselves, we've produced resources to help schools evaluate what they do. And then we've worked with governments to produce different guidance for those commissioning schools, for those working in schools and those designing schools. But we also produce resources to help schools manage their own school grounds, for example. So that is a guide, a maintenance guide, that we produce to help schools maintain their grounds, particularly for pollinators, because that was the project that funded it, but for all wildlife, and therefore for children. So why do we carry out that evaluation and research? Part of it is to make sure we're doing what we want to do, that what we're doing is effective. It's all very well, doing all these changes and saying, oh yeah, we're going to teach outside more. But if it's not working, there is no point to it. The research, I think I've already said, is really important to give us credibility ourselves, to make sure we're doing things right, but to give us credibility with policymakers, with people who make decisions. And that really also leads on to where we get funding from as well. We need that evaluation of what we're doing. We need that research to prove that what we're doing is good and therefore get the next bit of funding. So we also do a lot of work on training and supporting educators and designers and school grounds professionals. So I'm going to just speak to this one at the moment. This is some teachers we were looking at how to calculate pi in your school grounds. And I've done that with a number of teachers. And doing that inside, the biggest circles you can create inside, the amount of error is so wrong. So you measure your circumference, you measure your diameter, and you do the maths, and you get pi. If you do that on a huge scale, the error gets less and less. And the more people that do it, the error gets less and less. And so you suddenly realize what pi is. This abstract concept of, that is something to do with ratios of circumference and diameter. But you start to understand what it is by doing it, by being out there and doing it. And these were teachers who were what we call sixth form teachers. So that's right at the top. So that's 17 and 18-year-olds. And they said they were going to use this activity to try and get more students to do A-level maths. So that's really encouraging. The other goes to the other end of the scale, Forest Kindergarten. It's not Forest School, it's quite different. Forest Kindergarten is about working with early years practitioners and giving them, already experienced early years practitioners, the confidence to take more learning outside and using those local spaces that are around where they are based. If you want to know more about that, do ask those guys, because they know more about it than I do. But we produce resources as well about teaching. So this is a publication, Teaching the Primary Curriculum Outdoors. Hopefully it would work for a lot of you as well, because we had to write it for 4 curricula. So if it works for 4, it may well work for you as well. But ideas of different ways of teaching outside. But we also, on our website, I've spoken to quite a few people here who've said, oh, you've got tons of resources on your website. We use your resources all the time. So please do, if you go to our website, you will find a multitude of resources for teaching ideas. And they're not lesson plans. What they are ideas and activities that you can work out how they work for your school. So this is how our training works. We like to do in-person training. We all know that's the best. Sometimes we have to do online training as well, and sometimes we do blended learning. We also do advisory visits. So we go to schools and we walk with them around their site and we talk with them about how they're using their grounds, what works well, what doesn't work well, what are their issues, what are their barriers, how can we help them make the journey, the next steps in changing their grounds and changing their practice and policy, because it's no good just changing their grounds. They have to embed that into how they teach. They have to embed that into their policies. So that's the whole thing. So we end up with a long-term whole school approach. Some of our training is quite short and sharp, but we hope that just gets people inspired. But we want to do that long-term training because we know that embeds it better into schools. So that is why we do it. I've kind of answered those questions, really. But the key thing, the most important reason why we do the training is to build that confidence, build the skills in the teachers so that the children get more outdoor learning. That's why we do it. So the process there is why we do that, to give the children and young people better school grounds and better outdoor learning and play experiences. But as I said at the beginning, a lot of our work is project funding, and these are some of the things that we do and some of our funders, and I'll talk about a couple of them as we go through. But all our projects work to this structure. It might be a bit small for some people to read, so I'll just talk it through a little bit. We always start by getting schools to think of where are you now? Because we've seen schools that go straight head in without really evaluating what they've already got, without thinking about what already works and suddenly getting rid of something. And that can work equally with space, with practice, with policy. So we've seen schools kind of demolish one habitat type to put another habitat type in. We've seen schools not celebrate what they already do well. So it's thinking about those things. Where are we now? And then the next step is, where do we want to be? We've got this vision. We create a vision of where our ideal school ethos, rather than the ideal school, but the ideal school ethos and how we want to work. And we always ask children and practitioners, what do you want to be able to do? If you ask them what do you want to have, especially the children, that's when we get the roller coasters, that's when we get the swimming pools. And that's when we get Wembley Stadium. But if they say they want to play football, all they need is a bit of space and some jumpers for goalposts. So it's just getting them to think about what experiences do they want their children to have. What experiences did many of us have as children that they don't have now? So what are those experiences we want our children to have? And then the next stage after that is, how can we get there? That's the problem-solving stage. That's the kind of thinking through what do we need to do? We're here now, we want to get to there. What do we need to do to enable us to get there? That may be looking at policies. It may be looking at how we teach, curriculum change. It may be looking at staff training. It may be looking at how we change the grounds. And then the next step is making the changes. So we do what we've planned. And it doesn't all have to be done in one go. We often say school grounds projects are never finished. It's an ongoing thing. But it's important when you've done that, you go back and you reevaluate. Go back to where are we now? And we have some overriding principles to this. We always say it should be participative. So this is a whole school approach, as you've seen, so it really involves the whole school, involves the pupils, it involves the staff, all the staff, not just the teaching staff, all the staff. It involves the community. It involves everybody who will get involved in that process. It should be holistic, so we're looking at the whole child, the whole curriculum, the whole site. Often what schools do is kind of put one thing in a corner and then it doesn't relate to anywhere and they wish they'd put it somewhere else. So even if they don't do it all at once, we encourage them to think about the whole site together from the start. And finally, it needs to be sustainable. And we all know what that means in kind of climate change and environmental change, but we also mean that's about how we keep it working within a school. How do we embed that practice into a school? How do we ensure it isn't that one teacher that is enthusiastic and then leaves and everything falls to pieces? So these are all really important, how we work. So we've worked, just recently, in the last few years, we've worked on some very much wildlife-focused projects with over 350 schools. That's 35,000 odd children. They're not odd children, 35,000 children. And with this, evaluation has been really important because we've done a series of projects. And Anna, one of the Annas from Sweden, is doing a workshop on one of the developments of those projects later. So if you go to Natural Nations workshop, you'll see how our projects have developed. So we started by working with experts in pollination, because we're not experts in pollination. So we worked with butterfly conservation, bumblebee conservation, people like that, to develop a pollination project that was in school grounds about learning about pollinators, about evaluating your grounds now for pollinators, and then thinking, well, what are the needs of those pollinators, and then improving the grounds. And then now we've built on to look at birds as well. And if you need that, it's in Swedish, it's in Spanish, and in English. But if that's a useful project for you, please do have a look. So why do we develop and deliver those projects? We get to more schools doing that. We see things in practice. When I started, I was one of the very few Learning Through Landscapes officers that wasn't based in the office just giving advice. And the reason we had people out on the ground in posts was so that we could always have that contact with schools. So we never lost that contact. We were always in schools learning what worked directly in schools rather than just thinking about the theory. We work what really works in schools. And that's one of the reasons we still do it, to make sure we're in touch with schools and what we're saying is right for schools and works with schools. So that's why we evaluate those projects. But it's also, part of it is so we get kids that look like this. You can tell they've built that, yeah? So the pride and the ownership. It's also how we get funding. So we do projects because that's how we get funding. But there's so many good reasons for doing projects and just inspiring people through projects. It's good for publicity, it's good for getting our name out there, all those sorts of things too. And it's also good because of these. I don't like to normally read off a screen, but I am going to, no, actually I'm not, I'm going to let you do it while I have a sip of water. So please do quotes from children from one of our pollination projects. I think you can see the learning from the children there. They didn't know there were different pollinators, and I think there are many adults that don't realize there are a big range of pollinators. And taking away fear because you love something so much from the bees. So that's what children are saying. So that really shows these projects really matter and have an impact on them. And this is what the staff say. So it's not only learning what, but actually engaging and understanding and have that different level of understanding. And with these pollination projects, schools have small grants, £500–800, which is almost equivalent in euros. It's not large sums of money, but those small changes are things that children can do themselves. It's not somebody coming in and doing something, it's what children can do themselves, and they lead the projects. They decide what they want, and they make those changes. And it's getting in touch with worms, even though it was a pollination project. Actually, it's My School, My Planet. It's not a pollination. Well, it is, but it's wildlife and getting into the soils and climate as well. It's a big climate project that we ran in the middle of the pandemic. Yay. But because we were outside, we could. This is great. But what this has led on to is a project that the Department for Education in England is funding. So they did some research to find out what projects had been done in the past, and they found our pollination project and thought, this is great, how can we build on that? And in England, the whole area of grounds in England is the equivalent of 2 of Birmingham. Birmingham is our second largest city, so it's the size of a national park. So what is being created really is a virtual national park in school grounds across England. And I know the Netherlands is interested in this as well. That if others are interested, do come and talk to me, because I know our government is very keen to share it with others, including the rest of the nations of the UK. But at the moment, it's just in England. So there's 2 key aims of this project: to connect children more with nature and to increase the biodiversity across the educational estate. So those are the 2 key aims. There are apps, there's schools are mapping their grounds. There's a lovely map. If you go to the website, which is educationnaturepark.org.uk, educationnaturepark.org.uk, there's a map on it. We've been going since the autumn term, and we've got over 1,000 schools have already signed up and mapped the boundary of their grounds. And every time they map the boundary of their grounds, there's a map on the front of the page, and this bright green shape lights up, and it's getting brighter and brighter and shinier and shinier. So we've been working with a number of key partners. Natural History Museum lead the science on this. We work with the Royal Horticultural Society to get the work done on the ground. So we've got officers across the country who are supporting schools to do this on the ground. But it all kind of came out of what we did on the pollination project. So it's really important, that those things are shared and the evaluation is done to prove it works. So how do we work? As I say, children, young people, heart of what we do. Education charity at first. We have a broad approach. When our first director was appointed, he was a little bit worried that school grounds was quite a narrow topic. I don't have to say to you, school grounds is not a narrow topic. It covers health, it covers learning, it covers play, it covers biodiversity, it covers so many things that we've been learning about this week. We do a long-term whole school approach, and we adapt to the changing priorities. That's one of the things we can do. So as a school grounds charity, if something changes, and I'm going to finish off with some of the things, the way we're adapting now and the new projects we're looking at, we're ready to adapt and change. So all the things I've talked about, this is why we do it. So how do we engage with schools? How do we get into schools? How do we reach those schools? We have, obviously, social media, website, all those things. So that's a way we get through to schools and others. But we also communicate. This is what we communicate. We tell them about our free resources, which is, I think, probably the most popular bit of the website. Is that, Matt? Yeah. We tell them about new projects that we're doing so that they can come and be part of it. We tell them about grants, and we blog news and ideas of things that we're getting on. And also partners, because we do work with partners in lots of different ways. And we also run Outdoor Classroom Day, which is international. 12 million children so far have taken part. If you're interested in that, it takes place 2 times a year in May to coincide with International School Grounds Month and in November. So wherever you are in the world, it's a good time of year for you. We also have a grant scheme, and more than 1 in 10 schools in the UK, in Great Britain, unfortunately we can't work on this project in Northern Ireland, have received grants. But it's not just grants, they have to get training as well. So when they get something, they have to get us in. And if they don't, we ask for it back, frankly, because it's really important. But it's not a lot of stuff, or else they can pay for it, I guess. But we're developing how that works. So this year we're extending. Last year we started, and this year we're giving longer and extended training to schools so that it really starts to embed outdoor learning into their curriculum. And we're also focusing more on climate change. So moving forward, as I say, climate change for all of us, I think is becoming something that is really important. And we see school grounds as a really important resource, a space, a resource, where we should be teaching about climate change, because that's where we're seeing it happen. So we've already done some research. Matt and the team have worked with Architecture and Design Scotland to create some general guidance for schools. These are some of the kind of things that you can do. And just to say, there will soon be an ISGA climate statement. I say soon. We're trying to get it written before the end of the conference. We were doing it. We had a retreat before. So we're just finishing it off. So there'll soon be something that you may be able to use and say, this is why school grounds matter in relation to climate change in your own nations. And we work around 6 key themes. And these are our themes. Heat, cold. We started with heat, and Matt said, no, in Scotland, cold and wind as well. So we've got cold and wind. Carbon management, water management. Biodiversity, we find schools kind of get the biodiversity bit, but they don't necessarily get the other bits. And then we've got a big project which we call Climate School 180. And it's all about really looking at how we teach good climate education. And it's not about providing a system of lesson plans for schools. It's about them understanding how good climate education works and really embedding it into that whole school approach and philosophy. And again, if you want to know more about it, Matt is leading that project and can really help you understand how we're doing it. So we're training all our staff. So we're building capacity of our team before we help to build capacity of teachers, of senior teachers, of lead teachers, to make sure that that approach changes within their whole curriculum, their whole policy. And then hopefully we'll help them also plan changes, help them to work with their pupils, I should say, to plan changes to their grounds. So we're working with a number of expert advisors. The most important of those are pupils. But we're working with teachers, we're working with climate scientists, we're working with some climate education specialists, designers, ecologists. If you would like to join us in that discussion, please come and talk to me, because we want to get that information, we want to share that information from everywhere. So we're adding climate to our projects. We're thinking about how that goes in. We're looking specifically at nature-based solutions so that we can embed that not only into schools' work, but into our work as well. So why do we think networking and sharing information is important? As I say, when I come here to these conferences, and I've been to every ISGA conference, you always learn something new. You're always inspired by somebody else. You're encouraged by those others who work in the sector too, and by those schools who are just starting their journeys. So it's really important. One way we do that with individuals. We have an accredited network. So we train people who work with schools, specifically in school grounds. And we were here a couple of months ago in Ghent, rather than Genk, I have to get it right, to work with people from Mexico, from Portugal, from Belgium, and from the UK. To help them. So we work with educationalists, we work with designers, we work with play specialists to give them that school grounds approach. And it builds our capacity as well as theirs. We work with organisations. We sit on quite a few umbrella groups. Play Safety Forum is one you may have heard of. But we also sit on Council for Learning Outside the Classroom. We sit on some international ones as well. So this is the Greening School Grounds and Outdoor Learning Partnership. So we sit on that as well. And that means we can find out what's going on elsewhere, and hopefully we can have a bigger influence together than we can separately. We work with policymakers. Again, Scotland we seem to do better with them. Matt's working on how we change the school regulations policy, which haven't changed since school premises regulations hasn't changed since 1967. So it's a little bit out of date, so we're trying to work on that. We come to conferences, we run conferences, this was in Japan. This is a colleague seeing some amazing stuff, especially in kindergartens in Japan. But this is our patron. He was a trustee, founding trustee, he's now our patron, Sir David Attenborough. And this is what he says. I'm going to read it out loud. If children don't grow up knowing about nature and appreciating it, they will not understand it. And if they do not understand it, they won't protect it. And if they don't protect it, who will? Thank you. Yeah. We have time for some questions, so if people have questions.
Hi, Thomas Stephen from Trees to Cities. Thank you for an inspiring talk. There's been a lot of good conversation about improving biodiversity in school grounds, and also making sure that that's the space for the children and not just the school grounds in toto. But all of our work needs funders and evidencing. And in the UK, there's been some evidence gathering, there's been some policy. Previously, there was the BRE, and now we have urban net gain, biodiversity net gain. But these things are very hard to quantify, and they're shrouded in policy and specialists. And I don't know if you've got any advice or seen any good ways of quantifying that.
I think in England, in a sense, we're lucky because we have, and I won't forget the Scotland bit. Can we say it? Yeah. Okay. In England, in a sense, we're lucky because the nature park is aiming to do that. It's aiming to quantify the biodiversity across the site and the increase of biodiversity. So I would say please encourage your schools to join the nature park. So that is one way we're doing that. No, it is difficult, and it is important to have that evaluation. That's why research is important. That's why we work with universities. I don't think there's a simple answer, but I think, get the schools to join the nature park. In Scotland, do you want to, can we have microphone here so Matt can say?
Yeah, I agree. I think this is why we're doing a piece of work with, for instance, Scottish Government at the moment, and these out-of-date regulations that don't take account of biodiversity. School grounds are a place of learning, would you believe? School grounds in the regulations are currently just a place of break time and sport, nothing more. Because if we can start at that top level of what you have to produce, we then have to find solutions. So again, we're working on things. I used an example yesterday. For example, we have a tax on landfill that, if you put rubbish in the ground, it has to go to a tax. That tax can be spent in various ways. It currently goes through various systems. And in Scotland, it's blocked from going to schools. So this is multiple millions of pounds that goes to environmental projects and community-based environmental projects, but schools are excluded. So I now need to work with the government to say, well, why are schools excluded? Would it not make more sense to be at a place where children are daily and there's huge community benefit and learning and so on and so forth? So I think it's a very difficult situation. I don't think the UK is unique. I was listening to somebody from Germany yesterday saying they had similar kind of challenges, but I think it's working at that top level and pushing down to say, this is how important school grounds are. To me, it just feels as though a lot of the climate adaptation, biodiversity effort that's going on forgets that school grounds exist, and reminding them that they're here and can be funded and can be involved. And
Thomas was mentioning biodiversity net gain in England. We've got a new policy in that if any building takes place and it removes any biodiversity, you have to make improvements greater than the loss. And some of that potentially could be in school grounds. It then has to be maintained for 30 years. And that you might think is a positive for school ground, but it can be difficult for the owners. So we're trying to work through how that might actually work. Silence. Everybody wants a cup of tea.
Okay, thank you, Mary. Thank you so much.